Welcome to the first episode of Vinyl and Celluloid, my new podcast on movies and music. My guest today is my good friend Miguel Borsch, who is also a PhD candidate doing research in cognitive neuroscience in the Netherlands. Miguel is also a massive movie buff. We will be talking about last year's horror thriller Hereditary, why some people found it to be great, and also comment on several other modern day horror properties. Miguel, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, of course. No problem. Let's see if we can kick this off.
Let's get the ball rolling then. As I mentioned in the introduction, we'll be talking today about last year's horror movie sensation, Hereditary, and the current state of the horror movie genre in Hollywood and in the world. I mean, Miguel, we had a brief discussion when we saw each other live and in person last month. We came to the following conclusion. I didn't really like the movie. You did.
Yeah.
So, without talking too much about my opinion or starting with that, I would love to hear your thoughts. What made Hereditary so good? I mean, you've seen plenty of horror movies. What made Hereditary so unique, or what made caused such an impact that you enjoyed it?
Well, I think for Hereditary, it was really a couple of things. First and foremost, I believe it was the performances. I think both Tony Collette and Alex Wolff do just a crazy, crazy good performance, which drives everything else, in my opinion. Horror is, to me, a genre about the psychological, and I think Tony Collette and Alex Wolff make their characters wear their psychology on their sleeves, right? So you kind of really feel the hits, or at least I felt those hits as they were coming and hitting the characters. So that's the first point. And the second one, I think it's more personal because I think I have an affinity for example, Rosemary's Baby, and I saw Hereditary going down a path, as a horror movie and a movie that appeared to be presenting itself as a family drama. And then I don't know how much we can go into spoilers here, but in a general.
We can go into spoilers, no problem. I've already warned the listeners that we will be going into the spoilers now.
So the movie essentially begins presenting itself as kind of a serious psychological family drama, and then just zigs and zags all over the place and goes completely wild with its visual, with its imagery and its themes, in a way that maybe for some people, maybe they perceived it as kind of goofy or out of left field. I was just in for the ride completely. So as it kept escalating, I kept thinking they can't escalate anymore, and then they just kept doing it.
That's very a valid point. I mean, from my side, I think I know you tend to somewhat ignore the buzz and the advertisement and all the trailers and all the hype for certain movies. I mean, when I first watched the trailer, I recall I was watching Deadpool 2 and the trailer came out, and believe it or not, I was wow. The images that I saw stuck with me. It was advertised as the scariest movie since The Exorcist. Of course, that seems to be a natural thing because every year there is a new movie claiming to be the scariest movie since The Exorcist. So The Exorcist is the benchmark. But again, like you pointed out, Hereditary has very little to do with The Exorcist and more to do with Rosemary's Baby, which is possibly not well known for modern day audiences. Now, my issue, or I completely agree that acting was good. I think Toni Collette did a very good job. Um, Again, she had already demonstrated her acting chops in the horror genre in The Sixth Sense. She even got nominated for an Academy Award back in '99. But again, it seems that yes, she's driving the whole thing. The movie is about her and her reaction. It's interesting you mentioned the cast, and you probably, well, intentionally left out Gabriel Byrne, who for me is an amazing actor and somewhat of an odd choice because you get an actor of such caliber and you put him in a very supporting role where he has very little to do. He's a victim of the circumstances. And I mean, yeah, you have that guy there with so much potential, and he's essentially in the sidelines. Um,
I mean, yeah. So I'm not super familiar with Gabriel Byrne, unfortunately. I think his performance was just fine because I believe his role, at least in how the movie came out in the edit, was basically to act as a kind of a straight man to all the craziness that was going on. Especially being a psychiatrist. I did, however, through some black magic, I read the original screenplay, and the movie sticks mostly to that screenplay in a really impressive way. One big difference is Gabriel Byrne's character, Steve Graham, because his character in the screenplay, if I'm recalling correctly, he kind of challenges and pushes back a lot more on everything that's going on. And honestly, I think maybe wouldn't have worked as well. But I might be mistaken because if you just read the screenplay, it actually seems like a pretty dry movie. It was reading the screenplay that made me really appreciate the quality of the acting because that's what kind of elevates it. So maybe if his role was expanded as well, then it too would shine like the others do.
It's a very interesting point. I mean, maybe when he was cast, that was the original plan. You're having a character that has a bit of a, well, it's more vocal about what's happening than the character that we see in the final product. So that makes sense. Again, it's interesting you mentioned the Rosemary's Baby comparison because for me, the movie goes beyond an homage to 1960s and 70s paranoia horror movies. I think that it actually became a copycat, especially during the second act. It goes fully into Rosemary's Baby. And yeah, I guess the story needed to go forward, but it wasn't effective. So what my impression was, as I left the movie theater, was simply okay. Here we have a movie that could have gone Rosemary's Baby, full Rosemary's Baby, or at least embraced the awkwardness and played with the characters because there is potential for that, and turn Tony Collette into say a Mia Farrow-ish version of the character, or go or stick with the jump scares, and the movie doesn't really stick to any of these fields. It simply plays along. It's intentional unintentionally funny. I mean, people were laughing, and I read about the only time I've read about or heard about people laughing at a horror movie was when The Exorcist 2 came out back in '77, and people were laughing, bursting out laughing. And that happened when I went to see the movie with all the crazy imagery that you were seeing, with all the naked people, with all the sound,
Yeah.
etc. So people found it amusing and not scary at all. And the movie failed to actually play that family drama situation, or I don't know. Maybe I missed something. What's your take on this?
Well, I think what you're mentioning, like this, as you frame it, kind of a lack of commitment to a specific path. I basically think that's what I really appreciated about it because my brain was constantly going, okay, I think I get it now. I was watching it and I'm like, okay, I see where this is going, and then I didn't because I thought it was going to be Rosemary's Baby, or I thought it was going to be a sequence of jump scares. And it's neither, right? It just keeps, like I said, zigging and zagging. And that just kind of really amused me, Because the scene when they go downstairs and now all of a sudden she's speaking with the voice of her daughter. And I'm just thinking, like, where is this go? Like, where can they go from here? Because she's demonstrated that there is something going on. So the plausible thing would be for the family to just leave, I guess. But then the rest of the events happen quickly enough that becomes a non factor, and I appreciated that because essentially, like I said, it was this constant surprisal at it breaking genre conventions by basically becoming a different genre that I thought was neat. and I thought really just blew me away. And on top of that, the imagery and, like I said, the performances compounded that feeling of not just seeing something that seemed to be surprising and impressive, but also seeing something that was, good in itself. And just lastly, on the topic of the audience in the cinema, so I saw this twice, and the first time I saw it, after a certain point, random people in the audience started doing the tongue click noise, which is a great joke, like the first three times, maybe. And after a while, it becomes tiring. But then I started realizing that I believe, obviously, I didn't ask them, so I don't know. But I really think that the reason why people started it and then continued it was from how uncomfortable they were feeling about the movie. It was their way to relieve tension to the other people they were seeing the movie with, to show them like, oh no, this isn't affecting me because I'm doing all of these jokes. That's my theory. The second time I saw it, no disruptions. I think people were really into it, except at the very end where they did people didn't laugh, but I think it's hard to take that ending too seriously.
I completely agree. I mean, from an imagery and cinematography standpoint, I would have to say the first act is rich. I mean, the opening sequence where you have the whole framing of the story into the dollhouse and the characters, that for me was brilliant. And then it all went downhill from there. I think that when you compare the beginning and the opening and the establishing shot with the what happens at the end, and I mean it's very close to what a lot of people complained about the last Star Wars movie where Leia just floats. I mean, people got the same reaction, whoa, the guy's floating and whatnot, and it's very self-explanatory. I mean, I could have done without the whole "you're now the demon" payment or PayPal or whatever.
Jesus, that sequence was just mind-numbing. The two times I saw it, and especially the second time, because the second time you can see, maybe 30 or 45 seconds before the actual last frame of the movie. That's when the movie should have ended. And it just keeps going. And they show, for me, that when they show the framed picture of Queen Lee, that's when I was like, okay, I think this is where you've crossed the line. At least for me, it's like this is now gone beyond funny schlock into like because it's this feeling, right, of someone in the production feeling like, I don't think the audience gets it. I don't think the audience will know what's going on. And so they added this final element. To me, that's what it feels like. And so that's, like a final sting on an otherwise, I think, pretty impeccable movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are great movies that ruin everything with the ending. Regarding the acting, I will only add that maybe it's me. I've seen enough horror movies and great female performances. I'm thinking about Jo Beth Williams in the original Poltergeist, Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist, Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby, and so on and so forth. And I've sort of seen that role. I don't think Toni Collette is adding a lot. I think it was good, but again, nothing groundbreaking. And again, I would just like to hear your thoughts on the plot twist approach. Listeners have already been advised that there will be spoilers, so you kill a semi-leading supporting character, the daughter, right? During the second act. And I mean, we've seen that. Nightmare on Elm Street did that in back in '84. You had the leading female character, and boom, she's gone. So I mean, was it effective? Was it something you were expecting? What were your thoughts? You've seen the movie twice, so I love to hear your opinion on the plot twist that, or at least the zigzagging, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I also really like that as well. I think I appreciated the most the execution on that scene. I think it's a good. So a lot of horror movies have this moment of like we've crossed the threshold, right? Like we've been standing outside of the haunted house for about an hour, and you see the haunted house and you hear the noises, and now you've gone inside, and now things are going to get weird. So that's the moment in this movie. That's the threshold moment. Except the threshold moment is just the craziest death sequence possible, right? It's like not only does it happen in an incredibly grotesque, visceral way, so there's a visual shock compounded with this kind of plot shock of wait, you did that, and then you have that performance from Alex Wolff where he's just staring ahead for a good 30 seconds, and you see him wanting to look in the corner of his eye, to look over to the mirror, to the back, to look at what's happening behind him, and he just doesn't. He doesn't, and then he just drives away. And that whole scene progresses until you hear Toni Collette scream the next morning. And I just thought that was fantastic, especially, and even her scream, like, that scene is end capped, or sorry, it's bookended by two fantastic performances. There's his total look of shock, and then there's a Toni Collette scream, which is just rending. I think that sequence works great, and plus, the thing that triggers the entire sequence, which is the sister character eating the chocolate cake with nuts. That is something that I also found kind of funny, because up until that point in the movie, you have at least like 3 or 4 characters saying, "Hey, do you have the needle? Hey, don't eat those nuts." Like it's constantly telling the audience this character is allergic to nuts. And then when the nuts finally show up for the first time, it has what the screenplay calls extreme close-up shot on the nuts being brutalized, which I just thought was such a fantastic thing for someone to have typed out on a screenplay, and then was executed with a lot of panache.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. We discussed the whole the original screenplay detail, and it sounds intense. Again, maybe I just need to watch it again. I know I left the cinema feeling wow. I was lucky enough. I went to see it with a friend who had free tickets, so I didn't have to pay to watch the movie. I guess I would have been more upset had I paid. But that's me, because simply I don't know, it didn't work for me, and I think it segues perfectly into the second topic, or the second theme of our first episode, which is how does Hereditary rank compared to other releases. I mean, we are now sort of what or witnessing a new wave or a rebirth of the horror genre, in the sense that we are Hollywood studios and OTT over the top producers like Netflix, they're able to attract top talent to horror, a genre that was usually seen as, hey, we can put out a movie for 20 million, 5 million, and boom, maybe it's a hit. It will go over 60 at the box office. Fantastic, great. But now what we're seeing is something very similar to what happened in the 60s and 70s, where you are attracting top talent to to these productions. So just to give some examples, you have, like I mentioned, Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist. That movie was nominated for 3 acting, was nominated in 3 acting categories. You had Carrie with 2 nominations. Even The Omen with William Holden, Lee Grant, Gregory Peck. I mean, wow, the level of talent that you used to be able to attract to those productions was outstanding. And then you sort of went into the formula franchise, Friday the 13th in the 80s, Saw in the 2000s, and now we're back to, well, the original concept, where you have Netflix putting out, and I mean, I'm not arguing about quality. I haven't seen it for all for all intents and purposes, but Sandra Bullock, Bird Box, right? Wow, Academy Award winner. Emily Blunt again in Quiet Place. Toni Collette in well, Hereditary, and even like movies that haven't attracted talent in to begin with, like It. I mean, unknown cast, relatively unknown cast. For the sequel, they are putting Bill Hader and Saturday Night Live alumnus and Jessica Chastain. Wow, that's pulling the big guns. So I mean, we're now, I think Hereditary came out at a time where when you have tons of very good movies that tend to be very, very good. I mean, It Follows. I found it amazing. Some people didn't like it.
It follows is really, really fantastic. Yeah.
Well, is it difficult to scare audiences and to actually make a movie that makes a difference, a horror movie that makes a difference?
Well, no, I don't. I don't think. I don't think it's difficult to scare audiences. I think it depends on what you're going for. I think it's more difficult to engage audiences with these kinds of movies. And what I think is interesting is this question that you've posed of like how did it go? So what happened basically between these, mentioned these slasher movies from the 80s and then whatever was happening in the 90s. How did we get from that to this point, right? You see, you've described this kind of bathtub graph where you have all of this talent at the beginning and then you have all of this talent now. And it's not to say that there weren't good or good movies in this middle period or untalented people working on them. I mean, there's tons of stuff. There's, I don't know, 28 Days Later, there's Jacob's Ladder, there's a lot of good stuff. I think maybe a big factor is the internet. And I think it's the way that marketing works nowadays, where you can perhaps, through word of mouth or with targeted advertising, you can get the people that you know will be into your movie to come to the cinema. Maybe that was harder in the 80s and the 90s, right? In the 80s and the 90s, you had to go for a wider approach, where if a movie was a horror movie, it would, or if it was horror themed in some way, it would have to hinge on either disturbing or jump scaring people, rather than making them feel uneasy. Because I think the majority of people don't want to go to the cinema and feel uneasy. There's a subsegment of the audience that's slightly twisted, I think, like us, and does like that. But we're not the majority. And so I think it's really the fact that we've gotten to a point where you can target a section of the audience and you don't need to really care how many people do go to see your movie. But maybe you know a bit more about this from the industry side. All I know, is that Hereditary is an A24 movie, and A24 is known for these kind of a bit more out there choices, right? As a distributor, and maybe to me that's the core difference, perhaps.
Miguel, you're absolutely spot on in terms of the niche approach. I would go a step further and actually add two different aspects to why we are seeing this, at least from my perspective. The first one is you mentioned A24. You have STX Entertainment. They also tried to bet on mid-level, mid-budget, that is, horror movies, and they've done a movie titled The Box with, I believe, starred Cameron Diaz. I don't recall. But it was actually taken from a Twilight Zone episode from the 80s, like a 10-minute segment, and they made it into a whole movie. And it sort of worked. People kind of liked it. It turned a healthy profit at the box office. But I think that niche approach, it could work, but it's somewhat limited. My view on why we're seeing this new or the rebirth of quality horror movies is exactly what drove the original hits of the 60s and 70s. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, you had Brian De Palma, William Friedkin, Roman Polanski. They were all delivering, and they were all visionaries because they weren't tied to the horror genre. Now, what we see nowadays, and a perfect example is Jordan Peele. He was a stand-up comedian, right? He wrote comedy, and he delivered Get Out, a movie that did extremely well at the box office, nominated for major awards, even won Best Original Screenplay for a horror movie with a message. And we're giving new voices and new talent and people that are not bound by the traditional horror genre frameworks, and you're giving them a voice, a platform. I
Sure.
watched Happy Death Day. I don't know if you remember that one. It came out a couple of days ago, and it was
Seen it. No, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
right. It's a beautiful movie because pretty much like Get Out, it combines two genres, and that's, I think, the way to go forward. It's a bit of mix and match. So it takes the premise and the plot from Groundhog Day, and puts a bit of 80s slasher.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, it works. It works. I mean, I'm not saying it's a brilliant movie. It's something that you enjoy watching, and it's funny, whilst being a thriller as well, right? So you're now giving that specific voice. And again, I'm not saying that the giants of the past. I mean, sadly, Wes Craven is no longer among us, but again, this may be a wake-up call for those who used to make horror movies, and I use Wes Craven because he reinvented the slasher genre with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Basically, you took a physical being like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees from the known slashers and gave it the, that special or the dream approach and the sort of mythology behind a killer without just being a killer who wants to kill people just because. And when even that approach or framework or blueprint became a bit tiresome, he revamped the thing with the meta horror. He did that with his own product with Nightmare on Elm Street, New Nightmare in '94, and 2 years later with Scream.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think, yeah, sure. I'm not a big fan of those kind of meta commentary movies, honestly, because I think it's a hard trick to pull off more than once. I like the first Nightmare on Elm Street, but I think that's pretty much it for me. Um, and yeah, again, the first Scream. It's funny to see these things pastiched in this way, but it also feels a bit restrictive.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I mean it is a valid point. I'm not saying I'm not excluding or at least saying that people should who created the monster to begin with should or have the duty to actually revamp it again. What I'm saying is you do have new voices coming along and new directors, and I'm really looking forward to the upcoming Us by Jordan Peele, for example.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, even M. Night Shyamalan, now you have him back to, I don't know, back into shape.
Well, he's working on the Shyamalan verse, I guess. I just want to see. Hey, listen, call me when he brings in the Avatar into his multiverse, his cinematic universe. That'll be crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean it's insane the amount of horror movies that you get nowadays, and I mean it's still seen as a relatively risk-free approach, low budget vehicle, but there is some quality in it. My
I mean, you don't need a budget to tell an interesting story. I mean, what's really impressive is things like again, I just have to come back to how interesting A24 is because as far as I can tell, there was a $9 million budget for Hereditary. So you can tack on maybe what is it, twice as much for marketing, for example. Let's say it's 20 million, and then it makes in 79 million. And Hereditary is, I think, the movie that might have made them the most at the box office this last year. Either that or maybe Eighth Grade. I'm not sure. No, Woman Walks Ahead, maybe. No, that can't be possible. And no, no, no. It was definitely Hereditary, and that's fascinating because if you think about all of the cool movies that they put out last year, like Lean on Pete and First Reformed. I know they're not horror movies, but I just love the idea that you have this distributor that essentially finances a lot of interesting movies with something like Hereditary, which is itself out there. I just like that idea. And so, what you're saying of these new voices, I think the key to allowing these new voices to say whatever they want to say is to have someone like A24 that can just say, "Hey, come on in and say whatever wild things you want to say, because we'll let you do it." And so keep trying to get these different creators from different backgrounds to just share what they have, because there's no shortage of outstanding ideas. Which is in part why I'm a bit hesitant about the idea of, like, for example, bringing back old franchises like they did with Halloween, or bringing back older directors. It just feels like every time you do that, there's an opportunity cost where you're not telling a new story, like Hereditary or like It Follows.
Well, yes, that is a valid point, and I mean, you can't really argue or blame studios for wanting to bring back a cash cow.
No, yeah,
Halloween, it has history. They're
yeah, sure.
releasing a new Friday the 13th movie, and even there is a crowdfunding campaign for a bunch of guys, creative guys, who came up with a new tackle on A Nightmare on Elm Street, but it's very indie approach. So, I mean, yeah, I agree. Big studios will want to bring it back because, again, hey, there's a new sequel, come see it, pay, done. But one thing you mentioned, it's very interesting, and this tackles, I guess, into the business models of independent studios versus major productions. And I mean, Get Out came from Universal. Big studios are still and it was an original story, and big studios are still putting out and betting on some of these productions. I mean, less so because they're tentpole and blockbuster driven, and these movies do not fit the profile. But every now and then they will take a chance on a newcomer and someone who will actually deliver something new and different. I completely agree that we need, or independent studios will need to fill that gap, but there's always the issue with, again, they will be restricted by budget. And I mean, it's exactly what you said. You do need to have a balance between a very good story or a story that's worth telling versus a story that's worth telling for 5 million or 2.5. Right. And that's where talent and the thing about talent comes in. I mean, A24 did, I don't know their specific mission, but I do know about STX Entertainment's mission, and their goal is actually to have something that used to work for Hollywood 60 or 70 years ago, which is have a major star locked into a project and have a star-driven output, and that's it. And we have a budget of 20-30 million. They haven't been very successful at it, but it seems that's the kind of mindset that's now driving the horror genre.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, what was yeah, Warner put out it, but again, it was an adaptation. Basically, it was taking something that worked for Stephen King and was popular, and they took it and made a movie out of it. But again, Stephen King has been the source for the last 30 years for TV movies, and well, we don't know what to do. Well, maybe we should adapt a Stephen King book into a movie. Um, so I mean, big studios will be always dependent on that. I think it will be up for the smaller studios and independent ones to be a bit more star driven and to have the ability to actually get the stars.
I mean, hey, whatever it takes, as long as they keep making this stuff, do whatever it takes. I mean, look, I mean, just seriously, you think about even when you think about the idea of a star driving a movie. If you look at something like Under the Skin, um, they take an actor that is incredibly popular and decide that they're going to put her in this completely outlandish role, and it just totally works. If that's what you have to do, then go for it.
It totally works, but Scarlett Johansson has never been known for being able to open a movie at the box office. So the thing is, when you have,
Oh, really?
and then very few actors nowadays can't do that. Even when you used to rely on the Tom Hankses of this world and Will Smiths, it's no longer true. They no longer do that. They don't have that ability. So it is a bit concerning.
But why do you think so? If they don't have that ability, so why do you think that that's the model to go for to try and get these stars?
It's very interesting because, like I said, STX Entertainment, they are, and I'm not being paid by them or paid by anybody else to criticize STX.
Oh, I am big bucks, big bucks. I'm being paid big bucks. You've let a Trojan horse in.
Thing is, they are using a model that used to work, and they're trying to sort of force it down, and you say, listen, it's still a Cameron Diaz comedy or a Jason Bateman horror movie, and you can't.
Wait, what's that? Tell me, what's the Jason Bateman horror movie?
It was the box, I think. I think it starred Jason Bateman, but they
The box. Jason Bateman is in the box. Is that what it's called?
so it was a Twilight Zone episode, man, from the 80s.
Is that what it's called?
It's the box, yeah. So basically, it was a Twilight Zone episode from the 80s about this guy in a black suit that shows up into a middle class, working class couple, and he goes and says, "Listen, guys, this is a box,
Oh,
right,
sorry,
with a
sorry. I'm
button."
just
Oh, sorry. It's I just looked it up. It's The Gift, right?
right.
The gift,
Okay.
that's the
All
one. Sorry,
right.
the box is the Twilight Zone one. So yeah, with the button, and if you press the button, somebody you don't know dies, but you'll get 2 million. And I mean,
Okay.
this is actually told in 10 minutes in the original series. And they do press the button, and the guy comes back, and plot twist or spoiler alert, he says, well, you press the button. Now the box will be reprogrammed and given to somebody else. Someone you don't know. Meaning they will die, so they need to spend the money fast. Fine, for 10 minutes, that's fine. STX delivered the gift or the box or whatever it's called into, I don't know, a 90-minute movie.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad.
Well, no, but it worked. It got good reviews
All right.
because people ignored the people weren't aware of the Twilight Zone because I guess I'm part of the few people that bothered to watch 1980s Twilight Zone episodes. And now you have Jordan Peele actually bringing back the Twilight Zone.
Sorry. Wait, don't. If it's about us, please don't tell me because I'm doing this experiment where I try not to learn anything about this movie. So I haven't watched the trailer or anything. I know it might kind of stop the discussion, but I'm just trying not to understand anything about it.
No, that's not a problem because it's about his side project of actually bringing back the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, yeah.
Something Leonardo DiCaprio has been trying to do. Again, we do.
That's probably going to be
Yeah,
good.
and this goes beyond studios and independent studios and major studios. You do have OTT platforms like Amazon and Netflix now betting on it. Now, Netflix has Black Mirror. Now, my question is, how will people take the Twilight Zone? And I've read that a couple of episodes are remakes of original stories from the 50s. How will people take these episodes when you have Black Mirror sort of filling in the gap? It will be interesting because the competition, like in everything, like in the entertainment industry, it's not no longer Studio A competing with Studio B for a horror market. It's actually all the platforms, all the channels, all the content producers competing to getting something out there. And I mean, it will be very interesting.
You know what? Maybe that's one of the reasons. Maybe it's there's such a competition for time and for mind space that you need to the way to convince people to commit that time is by having other people tell them like, oh, you have to watch this because it's so shocking or so surprising. Maybe that's a reason why these movies seem to be really taking off because they will present an outlandish scenario which maybe engages people more or convinces people more easily to just stop and watch.
Fair enough. Now that you mentioned that, what's your take on Black Mirror? Have you enjoyed?
I think Black Mirror. I mean, I love that someone is making Black Mirror. Like you said, it's pretty much just Twilight Zone in a way, focused on the modern day. I really think, however, that I pretty much every episode from the third and the fourth season, or for the seasons after the Netflix partnership, almost every single episode has really not really hit it for me, and it's frustrating. I usually love the concept. I love usually 80% of the execution, but then there's just something they just don't commit. Like they don't really close the loop on a lot of those episodes. Honestly, my favorite from the recent past is one that I think most people actually disliked, which was Metalhead, which is that weird, that black and white episode where it's all about future robot dogs chasing down these characters in a mostly dialogue-free episode. And that's the one that really worked for me because the concept was so simple and straightforward, and all of the others kind of get too tangled up in themselves. Apart from that, from the first seasons, the entire history of you, I think that's called. That one is pretty great. And the one where Donald Gleason gets downloaded from Facebook onto a plastic body is also fantastic.
I did enjoy some of them. I have to say, I'm not a fan of the usually fan favorite San Junipero.
Yeah, I think San Junipero, again, it executes on this visual very well. It executes on the core ideas, but then at the very end, I'm just feeling like I'm not buying these characters, for example, like not fully. But nevertheless, yeah, it was one of the better episodes, I think.
Well, it will be very interesting to see how Jordan Peele manages to actually.
Yeah,
I think
that's a good point.
he'll be also the host of the Twilight Zone. It will be very interesting to see. I mean, some of the episodes I know I immediately know that I won't enjoy them that much because I'm not really keen on seeing a remake of Nightmare at 30,000 feet. I really am not. I've seen that story
Not again?
twice.
You don't want that again? One more time, just one more time. Hey,
I've seen the
what's on the
story.
wing? Who knows what's on the wing? I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, I've seen John Lithgow doing it. I've seen William Shatner doing it. I mean, again, the monster in the wing, but I don't know. Maybe there will be a twist there. But I'm looking forward to the original content, and I really want to see if the show can go up against Black Mirror, because I think everything nowadays with Black Mirror is look, technology, horror, done, and that's
Yeah,
their.
I mean, I started making this joke where like I just assume from the start, before the episode starts, I assume the episode's going to be about some neuro magic device. Always, it's always going to be some kind of neuro magic device. Oh, this VR game puts your consciousness in the game. Oh my God, who knew? Your consciousness is now inside of a bear. Who knew? I mean, come on, guys. You got to stop doing the neural brain tap. You can, if you've done it like 5 times, you should put it on a moratorium, and someone should tell Charlie Brooker, like, hey, the brain. Just imagine that there isn't a magical neural tap for about five episodes, and see what comes up from that.
Well, I know what comes up. Audiences go down because they really are a sucker for that.
Maybe. I mean, there's
I
a
don't
what
know.
was it? The last season had so much of that, right? Like it had that whole episode with the hamster at the end, basically like a weird detective story. It had the Star Trek MMO mix up. I mean, all of that and then it had that weird Black Museum episode at the end. All of them are about consciousness transfers, and you don't. I mean, I have opinions on consciousness transfer topics, so you bring that up, and then just kind of let it hang. I don't know. Just stop doing it, please.
Agreed, agreed. I mean, yeah, we are seeing a lot of outputs, horror related outputs on Netflix and whatnot. I mean, I haven't seen Bird Box, but as far as I hear, it's pretty much, okay, we've tackled people who can't speak in The Quiet Place, which was a very good movie, mind you. But now we're tackling people who can't see. I mean, okay, finally there is a disability in order to survive, and I mean, it's a new genre, like Stranger Things and Summer of '84 did with the new or not so new genre of 80s kids in bikes. Which is, I mean,
Yes.
something that
Yes.
it's amazing because you put kids in bikes. That could be an alien, could be a exploding factory, could be a portal to a different dimension. Who knows? But kids are riding bikes, and there's like a soundtrack. Boom. That's
Yeah.
how you sell it nowadays.
You're right. Kids riding bikes in the 80s seems to be a genre that people are very, very much into.
I can't help but wonder how many kids actually rode bikes in the 80s, because you see that in the Goonies, in E.T. and Poltergeist and all those 80s movies, but you can't really help but wonder, was it a thing? I mean, you and I weren't born in the 80s, but do people really relate to to kids riding bikes? And they're like, I used to be that guy, pumping out Van Halen on my Walkman and going down the street.
Yeah.
That feel.
Very good. I don't know about you. But maybe, maybe in 25 years we'll have nostalgia movies about the GPS tracked electric scooters.
Wow. Or two friends who actually talk on a podcast. Yeah, that would be good.
Wow, that's the next found footage. You got it. You found the next found footage.
Found footage.
You made it.
Great. Miguel, thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time, and thank you again for being a guest on the first episode.
Yeah, sure. It's fun. Hope this goes as well as it will, for sure. And good luck. I look forward to hearing what you'll do with other guests.
Yep. And if it doesn't work, we'll bring you back for 25 more episodes.
It sounds good. Just put me on a contract.
Fair enough. Thank you.